Hello, my name is Rabbi Bert Visotsky. I am the director of the Milstein Center for Interreligious Dialogue at the Jewish Theological Seminary. And today I welcome you all to the annual John Paul II lecture on interreligious understanding, which we co-host with the John Paul II Center on Interreligious Dialogue with help from the Russell Berry Foundation. I'm delighted to introduce Idana Goldberg, the CEO of the Russell Berry Foundation, for some words of welcome.
Hi, everybody. On behalf of the Russell Berry Foundation, I'm honored to welcome you to this John Paul II annual lecture on interreligious understanding. I want to start with my appreciation for the co-sponsors of today's event, to Rabbi Bert Visotsky and the Jewish Theological Seminary, and Dr. Adam Afterman of the John Paul II Center for Interreligious Dialogue. Today, we're gathered to delve into a topic that is unfortunately more relevant than ever: how to confront anti-religious bigotry. In a world where diversity of beliefs and faiths should be celebrated, we sadly witness the rise of intolerance, discrimination, and bigotry toward individuals and communities based on their religion. Anti-religious bigotry takes many forms, from discrimination and prejudice to hate speech and violence. It impacts people of all faiths and undermines the principles of tolerance, respect, and inclusivity that are the foundations of a harmonious society. At the Russell Berry Foundation, we are committed to promoting interfaith dialogue, understanding, and cooperation. We believe that confronting anti-religious bigotry requires a multifaceted approach that involves education, awareness, and action. It is through knowledge, empathy, and compassionate engagement that we can address this pervasive issue and foster a more just and inclusive society. We're therefore delighted to welcome our distinguished speakers, Dr. Mohammed El-Sanusi, Catherine Laura, and Rabbi Esther Letterman, co-founder and co-chairs of the Shoulder to Shoulder campaign, who are demonstrating through their work how people of diverse faiths can join together to combat hate. Thank you all for being with us today, and I'm looking forward to this important conversation.
Thank you very, very much, Idana, for your words of welcome and your steadfast support. Those of you in the audience, you are muted, and you will remain muted throughout the presentation, which should end around 1:15. If you have questions for our panelists, I welcome you, please, to use the chat and send the chat to me, Bert Visotsky. So you'll find my name on the chat list, and if you have questions, send them to me. I also want to welcome at this point a group that is watching together. There are about 30 religious leaders from the National Council of Churches and the National Council of Synagogues. They're meeting together for a 2-day meeting, and I'm just delighted to have them watching along with us. Yesterday, the National Council of Synagogues and National Council of Churches met at the Jewish Theological Seminary, and I was there with my colleague, Catherine Laura. So let me now turn to the panel. I'm going to introduce them, and what we're going to do is, first, I will ask each of them to speak from their own religious perspective. So for instance, I'll ask Rabbi Letterman to talk about anti-Semitism, or I'll ask Dr. El-Sanusi to talk about Islamophobia. We haven't quite figured out what the term of art is for, what is it, Christianophobia or something like that. But nevertheless, there is also bigotry against Christianity as well. The issue is really, I think, potent right now. So each person will speak first from their own religious perspective, and then we will have some group discussion. One of the things we've learned in preparing for this is that international bigotry, when we see it, so for instance, the kind of nationalisms that we've seen, ISIS in Iraq, the Chinese repression of the Uyghurs in Burma, the Rohingya, Indian nationalism, which is both anti-Christian and anti-Muslim, the tensions in Israel-Palestine. Those kinds of things also have local implications, and there has been in all of our communities local resurgence of anti-religious bigotry, whether it be Pittsburgh or Colleyville for the synagogues, the Muslim ban throughout the United States, what happened in Charlottesville. These issues are really serious issues that are on our agenda today. So I'm going to first introduce all three of our panelists, and then I'm going to invite Rabbi Esther Lederman to begin the talk. Rabbi Esther Lederman is the Union for Reform Judaism's Director of Congregational Innovation and sits on the Central Council of American Rabbis Task Force on the Experience of Women in the Rabbinate. I am happy to say that my Reform colleagues have had women in the rabbinate longer than any other denomination in Judaism. So Esther, you have what to say. She was previously an associate rabbi at Temple Micah in Washington, D.C., and is currently the co-chair of, I'm going to give the full name, the Shoulder to Shoulder campaign, Standing with American Muslims, Upholding American Values. Dr. Mohammed El-Sanusi is the executive director of the Network for Religious and Traditional Peacemakers, which is a global network that works towards sustainable peace. Mohammed El-Sanusi was previously the director of community outreach and interfaith relations for the Islamic Society of North America, and that is the largest umbrella group of Muslims in North America. He served on the core group task force for the U.S. Department of State's Working Group on Religion and Foreign Policy, and he has been a co-chair of the Multi-Faith Advisory Council to the United Nations Interagency Task Force on Religion and Sustainable Development. And Mohammed was one of the two co-founders of the Shoulder to Shoulder campaign. And last but not least, my colleague, Catherine Laurie. Catherine is the assistant to the presiding bishop of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, and she is the executive for ecumenical and interreligious relations and theological discernment. I love that title. From 2012 to 2013, she served as the president of the National Council of Churches USA. Having been in the room yesterday and knowing that she was president already 10 years ago, I can tell you that she must have been by far the youngest president, since most of the people at the National Council of Churches and the National Council of Synagogues are old men like me. From 2000 to 2011, Catherine also served at the Pluralism Project at Harvard University, and she currently co-chairs with Esther the Shoulder to Shoulder campaign. So I've introduced you to our speakers. We have set the table for our discussion, and I would now like to call on Rabbi Lederman to lead us off.
Thank you so much, Bert. I'm so humbled to be here with you, Bert, with you, Catherine and Mohammed, and with the other sponsors of this talk. It is a pleasure to be with you this morning, even though the subject for which we have to talk about is quite serious and important and troubles my heart. I'm also just grateful for all of you who are on the call, listening in and thinking about ways that you can think about how we fight religious bigotry. So a few points, I only have 5 minutes just to start. Anti-Semitism is on the rise in America and across the globe. And I actually don't want to get into the numbers. And I want to share that perspective by quoting Ambassador Deborah Lipstadt, who's currently the U.S. envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism. And she wrote a book in 2019, Anti-Semitism Here and Now, which is still quite relevant, even though more anti-Semitic attacks have grown since then. And this is what she says in the introduction. Numbers should not be what drives us. What should alarm us is that human beings continue to believe in a conspiracy that demonizes Jews and sees them as responsible for evil. She adds that anti-Semitism is a worldview, so therefore it cannot be measured by the number of recorded anti-Semitic acts or by the number of people we label anti-Semites. So irrespective of the rise that we see, this is a scourge that we need to address in our hearts, our souls, and minds. As a child, I grew up in Canada in the 70s and 1980s, and we certainly knew what anti-Semitism was. I definitely was raised learning about it. I saw it occasionally, but I believed it was mostly in the past. It really belonged to the world of my grandparents and those who died in the Shoah and the Holocaust. And I was made aware of the progress the world had made and the progress we as Jews had made in terms of being welcomed, tolerated, respected, and honored. So when I was ordained in 2008, I did not imagine I would have to deal with the scourge of anti-Semitism in my day-to-day life. Never did I believe I would have colleagues who had to fight against white supremacists in their college town of Charlottesville, Virginia. Never did I believe we would be mourning the death of 11 souls killed while in synagogue celebrating Shabbat because of the beliefs of a white supremacist. Never did I believe that one Shabbat morning I would be watching the news while another rabbinic colleague, the beloved Rabbi Charlie Citron Walker, was held hostage with fellow congregants, all because of an anti-Semitic belief that Jews control the world. And these are just a few examples here in the United States. The rise of anti-Semitism in Europe chills my heart. In places like Brussels and France and Germany, murdered Jews because they are Jews. So anti-Semitism has become part of my world, not as something that has happened in my past to my ancestors, but as something that impacts the people I love and call my family and my community. There have been acts of anti-Semitism in both of my kids' schools. There have been acts of anti-Semitism in local high schools where I live. My husband gets anxious every time and anytime I leave the house with Hebrew lettering on a t-shirt or I take the kids to religious school. Every time I sit down for prayer, either in my sanctuary or a visiting congregation, I look for the exits, something I never used to do. And I also say this knowing that I also have privilege. I am a white presenting liberal Jew, so I pass because I don't look like a Jew the way Hasidic Jews do in the streets of Brooklyn, nor am I a Jew of color, a community that bravely faces the anti-Semitism of the world, along with the racism of the United States, including sometimes in congregations. So I want to end with just highlighting two of my biggest concerns in the moment today that are related. One is the enabling of anti-Semitism and the enabling of anti-Semites in our society. What I didn't realize and what I've come to recognize is that anti-Semitism has always been with us. It wasn't just in the past, it's just been in hiding. And since 2016, we've had a number of moments that have enabled anti-Semitism to thrive and opened for the door for anti-Semites to emerge in the full light of day, proud of their beliefs. It certainly did not help when the former president of this country stated in the wake of the events of Charlottesville that there were good people on both sides. Frankly, there are too many ways anti-Semitism has been enabled by people with a significant sphere of influence, whether they be podcasters, authors, or members of government or political figures. Second, social media has only made the problem even worse. Twitter, Discord, Facebook, these modalities have allowed anti-Semitism to spread and grow like a poison infecting our society and body politic. And when you take these social media platforms and combine them with the chief enablers of our society, you have a perfect storm. I'll end with this. I am a Jew when that means I live with hope. But I also am a Jew who has to believe in reality. So I live really in the tension between believing that we can make a difference in improving anti-Semitism and anti-religious bigotry, but also needing to have our eyes wide open about who's out there and what are the views out there that want to destroy my community and my people. So I thank you for starting this conversation.
Thank you very much, Esther. You've set the stage for us very well, and I'm going to ask both Mohammed and Catherine to do the same, each from their religious denomination. Once the stage has been set by all of us, then as a group we can discuss how do we deal with the problem? How do we work on this issue? Is it simply something that we can only hope might go away, or are there actually concrete things we are able to do? So to hear about Islamophobia and the issue of bigotry in the Muslim community, I call on my brother, Mohammed El-Sanusi.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Brother Bert, and really delighted and humbled to be with my colleagues on this panel. And I also want to just appreciate the support of the sponsors of this particular program. It's really critical to discuss such an important issue. We all know that Islamophobia is rising, whether here in the United States or around the world. And Islamophobia definitely impacting the Muslim communities. We see that some of the reports already indicated that the rising Islamophobia, as well as we see that negative impact of Islamophobia in our own children, in the school, in outside when we go shopping, for instance, we see some elements of that. Our houses of worship and our places of worship are also attacked because of this rising Islamophobia. So we know that, we understand that's the reality of the matter. But I really want to begin by telling my own theological understanding from the Islamic perspective, why we should live together as people of different faith, different tradition, different orientation, different background. We have a clear, messages and verses in our own scriptures. They are talking about, we are all created equal. We're all created from male and female and made, peoples and tribes that we may know one another, not to hate one another, but to know one another. Indeed, the most noble of us, of you in the sight of God, is the most righteous and that enjoy the piety. So we have that, the core, in our religion. We also have our Prophet of Islam, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, really made it clear to us in his last sermon before he passed away. He basically called upon all mankind. And he said, all mankind is from Adam and Eve. And Arab has no superiority over a non-Arab. Nor does a non-Arab have any superiority over an Arab. A white has no superiority over a black. Nor does a black have any superiority over a white, except by piety and good action. We have that as a strong foundation in our religion. But unfortunately, the reality of the matter is completely different. We see Islamophobia is rising, anti-Semitism is rising, and anti-bigotry is rising. Then these are anti-bigotry, anti-Semitism, they are rising. There are a number of reasons for that. And I just want to mention that, Brother Bert, you mentioned the Muslim band in your introduction. But also I want to expand that to the negative political rhetoric that we see. And how is that actually also increased Islamophobia, increased the fear from the Muslim community. So, but this is the reality. But what we need to do to address all of these issues, I think as the people of faith, we have to address this issue through our interreligious collaboration, partnership, and understanding to strengthening our relationship. But before we go to that interreligious collaboration to address anti-Muslim bigotry or anti-bigotry or anti-Semitism, we need to prepare our own house in order. We need to engage in that an interfaith dialogue. I want to prepare my own Muslim community that in order for us to address Islamophobia, we really need to build bridges with the larger interreligious and religious communities. And we have done that, Bert. We have done that. Before Rabbi Eric Yaffe came, Eric Yaffe was the president of the largest Jewish movement in the United States, the URJ. We invited him to address our largest convention as the Islamic Society of North America over a decade ago. But before we made that decision, we prepared the community. We had our own interfaith dialogue, how we can extend all of this relationship. Then when Rabbi Eric Yaffe came and addressed the congregation and the largest convention, he got a standing ovation. Similarly, when I accompanied the former ISNA president, Ingrid Mattson, who's a good friend of Bert, to the Union for Reform Judaism biannual with 6,000 delegates in California, she also got a standing ovation. So then we came up with the book, Children of Abraham of Conversation, addressing this understanding at the grassroots level. This is just one example. With the National Council of Churches also, Catherine is here. We remember we had the National Christian Muslim Dialogue Roundtable, just to enhance our understanding. So preparing our own house in order, then we go to the collaboration of the interreligious collaboration, and we have done that. And we can see the fruits of the interreligious collaboration. You already mentioned Shoulder is a clear evidence on that. And then we have other evidence also, we can really talk about it. So we cannot address the issue unless we address it together. This is an issue that there is no one community. Issues of bigotry and racism are not issues that could be addressed by one community. We need to have that collaborative efforts to address the issue. Thank you, Bert.
Thank you. Mohammed, you quoted the prophet, peace be upon him. And
Sure.
I'm pretty sure the first part of the quote was from the Quran.
That's correct.
Do you have a reference? I know some of the listeners would like to be able to look it up and see with their own eyes so they could see that passage in the Quran. I think it's in the Surah The Rings.
Yes,
but
Surah Al-Hujurat, Surah The Rings. And it's a verse, I believe it's 122, but
that's a very long chapter.
Quran 49:13.
Okay, 49:13. Thank you for that reference. I also want to take a moment to thank Mohammed for being on this panel. Many of you on this call may know that this is the last week of Ramadan. And Mohammed, the pious Muslim that he is, he's been fasting every day. I know if I had been fasting every day for the last 3.5 weeks, I would just be unbelievably cranky. But Mohammed always is a man of cheerful countenance. And I think it speaks well for the ability to do the interreligious dialogue that we do. So I want to thank you for that.
Thank you.
I want to turn now to our colleague, Catherine Laura. As I said in her introduction, Catherine is the co-chair, current co-chair of the Shoulder to Shoulder campaign. She's a former president of the National Council of Churches. Catherine, you've been mixing it up in these kind of dialogue situations for a very long time. So we're eager to hear your words, please.
Thank you, Rabbi Vysotsky. And it's such a pleasure to be here with you and with our colleagues. And a small word of thanks to our co-sponsors. This is such an honor. I want to look back to about 5.5 years ago now, when I was a participant in a meeting in South India that was convened by a global ecumenical organization in partnership with the local and regional ecumenical bodies and churches. As participants in that conference, we were instructed not to indicate the real purpose of our visit when we came through immigration or to implicate our hosts. Instead, we were simply tourists visiting UNESCO World Heritage Sites. And as I stood at that immigration desk, I'll be honest, I felt both nervous and conflicted. Just a few weeks prior, the presiding bishop of my church had come through the same airport in a different visit to our partner church. And in her exhaustion after that long journey, she forgot the similar advice that she had received. And upon stating the purpose of her visit, which coincidentally was to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the decision to ordain women of that church, she was detained, questioned, and turned back to the US on the next flight. A couple days later, on the final night of our ecumenical meeting with the leadership of the Christian churches in the region, the meeting concluded, and behind closed doors, our hosts began to share with us off record. And what they shared was their plight in the face of rising Hindutva or Hindu nationalism. They were afraid for their congregations and communities, for their families, and really for their very lives. And in the stories, we heard the fearful echoes of the anti-Christian animus and persecution that you, Bert, recounted at the start of our call in places such as Burma, China, Nigeria, and Syria. But I also heard in those stories the fearful echoes, especially of my Black, Jewish, and Muslim neighbors at home, colleagues and friends who are targets of nationalism in my own context. I was reminded of their response to the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville that Rabbi Esther mentioned, where white supremacists brazenly marched in the streets, shouting, "Jews will not replace us." And while I was outraged, they were terrorized. Anti-Jewish, anti-Muslim, and white supremacist bigots had come out of the shadows into the daylight, emboldened by the highest leadership in the land and praised, as Esther said, along with counter-protesters, as very fine people on both sides. In a recent book, The Psychology of Christian Nationalism, Pamela Cooper White describes the deadly fear that's at the heart of Christian nationalism. It's the fear of losing both Christian supremacy and white supremacy simultaneously, or more precisely, the illusion of it. The rally in Charlottesville was literally a protest against the removal of Confederate statues and flags, but it was also a protest against the perceived destruction of a specific social hierarchy claimed by many to be ordained by God. And it wasn't just the ideological forms of Christian nationalism that were coming home to roost. Policies, including the so-called Muslim ban, introduced earlier that same year, were seeking to codify religious bigotry as a way of protecting that social order. And over the next 4 years, white Christian nationalism would rise to a fever pitch, culminating in the actions of an angry mob who stormed the US Capitol on January 6, 2021, awash in Christian symbolisms and slogans. As in other parts of the world, religious nationalism had become not only a public health crisis in our country, but a threat to the very foundations of our democracy. But lest we think that this is the domain of extremists only, Christian nationalist ideas hold sway over large segments of American population. In a recent study titled "Taking America Back for God," which was conducted by Whitehead and Perry in 2021, they found that just over half of Americans subscribe to Christian nationalist ideas. And it's no surprise to any of us that the holdouts are folks like my colleagues on this call, Jews and Muslims, people who are unaffiliated and so on. And while evangelical Christians account for the largest percentages of those who actively support Christian nationalism, as well as those who accommodate it, sizable numbers of Catholics and mainline Protestants do too. I think we have to ask ourselves, how is this possible? Especially those of us who are Christian, we have to ask that question. The details of the study revealed that the widespread appeal of Christian nationalism has little to do with Christianity, nor with our own actual national histories. Instead, what it does is it provides an intoxicating distortion that constructs a triumphant religious and national identity, which overlaps with and provides cover for white supremacy and racial subjugation. Christian nationalism is not a religious ideal, but a deadly political ideology. And thus, in this way, anti-Christian animus in the US can be understood as resistance to the existential threat that its deadly forces pose to so many, and I would personally argue, to the gospel itself. This co-optation of Christianity in service of a nationalist agenda isn't a new phenomenon. It's the stuff of empires. Yet history repeating itself does not absolve us of the need to repudiate Christian nationalism. It reinforces that need. Christian nationalism is a perversion of Christian faith. It is sin, separating us from God and from our siblings made in God's image and likeness, who we are commanded to love. Nothing is supreme except God Almighty, as an echo of the Prophet Muhammad's sermon that you referenced, Dr. Al-Sanusi. So in closing, I'd say that in order for our Christian faith to have integrity, Christians must repudiate Christian nationalism. And this is what my own church leadership, together with ecumenical Christian partners across the United States, have done through various efforts, such as the Baptist Joint Committee's Ecumenical Initiative, Christians Against Christian Nationalism, the National Council of Churches policy statement entitled The Dangers of Christian Nationalism, and my own denomination's social policy resolution, Condemnation of White Supremacy and Racist Rhetoric, in which we proclaim that Christian nationalism is not a true Christian faith. It is idolatry, and we condemn it. As Christians, we cannot pretend we're simply tourists. We must uphold the truth at the heart of our faith. To quote from 1 John chapter 4, there is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. This is an important antidote to anti-Christian animus in the United States and the foundation for our interfaith efforts that we'll turn to next. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Catherine. You have stated, as I always expect, well and articulately the problem, and I think you are right to highlight Christian nationalism as a very large part of the problem. I do want to point out that as much as Christian nationalism is a problem, it's not the only problem. There's also Islamic nationalism. Think of ISIS, the Islamic State. There is Jewish nationalism. Think of parts of the settler movement in the land of Israel. I mean, there are real hatreds being bred as part of our religious teaching. And as a rabbi and professor of rabbinic literature for almost 50 years at the Jewish Theological Seminary, I want to own that kind of chauvinism is there. It's extant in the Hebrew Bible, it's extant in the New Testament, it's extant in the Quran. And it's been a question of balance. How do we raise up the love and lower down the hate? But that's not just a religious phenomenon. I think that's true in every one of us as individuals. We struggle daily with raising up the love and lowering the hate. I also want to point out some aspects of calendar, because Muhammad certainly alluded to it, and I think actually we all have, which is this, that we're coming up on an election in 2024, and obviously it's already begun. We're hearing almost daily who's running for office, and make no mistake about it, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, Christian nationalism, these things will be part and parcel of the political rhetoric we will be hearing, which means that we, as religious leaders, will have to stand tall and firm in our pulpits, not to endorse candidates, but to talk about how candidates should behave and campaign to promote democracy and the well-being of all of us. I also want to note that this week is a week in which we commemorated Yom HaShoah, the Holocaust Remembrance Day. And it marks then the uprising in the Warsaw Ghetto. I don't need to, nor do I want to, recount the dangers of Nazism. We experienced that all too bitterly too long ago. But as Esther said, it hasn't really gone away. It's just been hiding. And now it's almost as though the monster has been given permission to reappear. And it's pernicious for all of us. So I'd like to invite you as a group now to rehearse a little bit. What can we do? What can we do as religious leaders, each in our own denomination, but also in the interfaith space in which all of us live? What can we do to combat this anti-religious bigotry?
I'm happy to, as the person who went first originally, I'm happy to go first. I think a lot about this, obviously, both with Muhammad. Yeah.
And I'm delighted you're going to go first, but I'm using this as a teaching opportunity. When the Israelites in the Bible were at the shore of the Red Sea, ready to cross Egyptians were behind them, pressing them. The sea was in front of them. And Moses put out his rod and commanded the seas to part. And according to rabbinic tradition, they didn't part. And it wasn't until one of the princes of the tribes, Nachshon ben Aminadav, literally jumped into the waters. And as soon as the waters reached his nose, then the seas parted. So we have a tradition of encouraging people to be Nachshon ben Aminadav. And Esther has admirably taken up that tradition. But I'm saying that to every listener on this call. You have to be Nachshon ben Aminadav on this particular issue. So with that, thank you, Rabbi Letterman. Please go ahead.
And
I'll
the same
always sit
story,
back. Yeah.
and the same story, Rabbi Bert, it is in the Holy Quran. When Moses actually put his stick in the sea, and the sea basically open up so that the wise people can cross the sea. So it's exactly the same.
Yes, as we say, Alhamdulillah.
Yes,
Esther, please.
Well, Mohammed, first of all, I always will love to listen to you teach, Bert. And Mohammed, your point about it being also in the Holy Quran, I think leads right into so I just have a few short things I want to
Go.
First, recognizing that there's more that unites us than divides us. We have more in common than we do that separates us. And yes, there are differences in our religious traditions, and there are concerns to certain communities that may not be as big of a concern, but just recognizing that actually there is more that unites us that divides us. But and tied to that is what Catherine talked about. We have a common enemy, and its name is white Christian nationalism. I think it's anti-Semitism. I think anti-Semitism has fueled white Christian nationalism. It's fueled Islamophobia. And as Catherine so eloquently put it, right, it's idolatry from her own tradition. So, and I think the white Christian nationalisms and nationalists out there, they benefit when we fight. They benefit when we struggle with one another. And so because of the common enemy that we have, I think we have to recognize that we need to be in deep relationship with each other. We need to be coalition building. Shoulder to shoulder, I think, is a really good example of that. The last few things I'll say are the following. I think within my own community, sometimes there is a mindset of scarcity over this rather than a mindset of abundance. What I mean by that is sort of, it's the oppression Olympics, right? Like if we're there's only so much in the pie. So if we have to focus, we should be focusing on what hurts us more than on what hurts our neighbors. And I just think that's a false assumption and a false set of choices, that we are stronger when we are in deep relationship with Muslims and Christians, in supporting what hurts them. So therefore we can be supported in terms of what hurts us. And I think that's the Jewish teaching for me. There's the classic story of the Sassover Rebbe who said, in speaking to his drinking buddy, turned to, who said, tell me, friend, do you love me? And his friend says, of course I love you. We drink together every night. And then the first one says, well, then what causes me pain? And he says, I have no idea what causes you pain. And he was like, then how can you love me if you don't know what hurts me? Mm-hmm. And so this idea that we have to really know what hurts each other, and also by knowing what hurts you and by you knowing what hurts me, we can maybe work together to fight against that. And the last thing I'll say is a warning. There are wedge issues that will come in, and I say this, I don't want to take over I don't want Israel and Palestine to become the main issue we talk about for the next, 30 minutes, but recognizing that sometimes Israel-Palestine it can be used by those who want to divide us as a wedge issue. And we need to keep our head on the ground and stay focused on what will benefit us as North American religious figures and religious communities around fighting anti-Semitism, fighting Islamophobia, and fighting against Christian nationalism, because those wedge issues could potentially tear us apart, and it's up to us to make sure that they don't.
Esther,
I'll end there.
I want to ask you rabbi to rabbi, but I think what I'm asking you is true of the other religions as well. as teachers of Judaism, we have a very limited bandwidth to communicate with our congregants and our followers, particularly our youth. You know, it used to be, I just yesterday heard someone say that they had founded an afternoon school that met 6 days a week. And now we're lucky if we get our kids 1 day a week.
Yeah.
And, you know, then after their bar mitzvah, we rarely see them again. So how do we apportion? How do we decide how much of our time we spend teaching just the core values of Judaism, and how much time then can I, as a rabbi, a teacher, spend teaching Christianity and Islam? How do we deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. You know, their time is limited. I mean, I think, you know, here's my perspective on this. And it might be different. Like, I'm not answering for Judaism. I just want to be clear. I'm answering for myself as a rabbi. You know, I have this concept, which I talk a lot about, that I talk about the difference between a text to life person versus a life to text. And as a rabbi, I'm a text to life person in the sense that I'm very comfortable in religious traditions. I'm very comfortable opening up a prayer book or a piece of Torah, a page of Torah or a page of Talmud, and finding meaning in it. I don't need to start with my life. I think with our kids, we need to start with the issues that they're facing. And I think part of what they're facing is how to live in a multicultural, multiracial, multi-faith world. I mean, except for the kids who are in private school, Jewish private schools, which I don't know what the statistics are of Jewish kids today. I know in my own movement, it's a very small number. So most of the kids, you know, we're working with, teenagers in particular, and then college, they're living in a world where it's in some, I mean, and America, I think by 2030 is going to be a minority majority country. So teaching them how to thrive in a world in which they are one of many minorities, I think is only going to benefit them. I'm not saying we shouldn't therefore not teach about Judaism, but if there's a way to talk about it from the perspective of to succeed as a human being in our society, you're not a human being there and a Jew here, like it's one and the same. What does it mean to be in relationship with immigrants, with Muslims, with Christians, with secularists and atheists? Like, I just think that's only going to benefit them as they then go on to college and then go on into work in the workforce, which is going to be one of the most diverse workforces they ever encounter.
So Esther, you live in DC, and I'm right, I think you have 2 kids, right?
I have 2, yeah.
And then let's see, Mohammed, you live in Virginia.
Well, I certainly live in Virginia, in fairness to
okay.
In fairness to the DMV area.
Mohammed, you have 3 kids, and both of you send your kids to, they're not in the same public school, are they? No. But Mohammed has 3 kids who have also, I think, go to the public schools, right?
Correct. That's right.
And then Catherine lives in the Chicago suburbs, and she has 4 kids, also in public schools.
Yes.
So really, we're talking about a charge to the public. What does it mean to build a democracy? What does it mean to teach, as it were? I mean, I know when I was a kid, although that was, you know, decades and decades and decades ago, we learned civics in school. And I went to a school in Chicago that was probably, just by the makeup of the neighborhood, a public school, 98% Jewish. But we learned about all of the religious traditions, and God knows I certainly learned every Christmas carol there was to sing in public school from my Jewish teachers. But, you know, I look back now and I think, well, maybe that wasn't the worst thing in the world, because I learned to live in a broader common culture. So can we talk a little bit about that? What does it mean to live in a broader common culture? And I'm looking at my screen, the questions are coming in. What does it mean that there is this rising group of, as NONES, the nuns? What does it mean for those who have no religious affiliation? So Mohammed, you want to start on that one?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that, and I'm really happy that you brought the children, question to this conversation. And just building on what Rabbi Esther has said earlier, and I want to just emphasize the importance of education, because your first question, what we can do on our denominations and community to combat this religious bigotry. So education really is the key. Education is to our own congregations. We need to continue to educate our congregations and religious communities about what is in our scripture and what is in our culture and custom that really speaks clearly against anti-bigotry. I think that education is important. And then that brings me to the children question. We need to train our children. We're living in a different world. We need to train them to accept the others, to learn how to live in a, pluralistic society, people of different background. We have to train them at home. So families really, they have work to do. I can tell you that. My 12 years old and 11 years old son, he's very comfortable to go and sing, in a synagogue or in a church or before an interfaith gathering. And he enjoyed attending Rabbi Bert Vazatsky, Seder Passover dinner 10 years ago when he was almost 2 years ago. So that was part of the preparation, right?
I remember with pleasure your 2-year-old singing along, "Die, Dayenu, Die, Dayenu," and I think he still does, yes?
I still remember, and actually your in-laws, but if you remember, they said that, well, he already converted to Judaism.
Yes, my in-laws, by the way, now 99 and 91, still ask after you and your family, because they were so impressed that you were there with your wife and 3 kids. It was just so special for us. That actually, I think, focuses, and you said it, you have to teach it in your family. You have to teach it in your religious school. I don't know the extent to which our public schools are going to be comfortable or able to teach any kind of religion. And frankly, I'm not sure I trust them to teach anything, perhaps, but Christian supremacy. I don't know. But Catherine, do you want to speak to some of these issues as well? As you're married to a minister as well, so you see it in the family, in the church.
Yes, I really think that the responsibility for education in the home, but also to the extent that we can do that together as people of faith. As you might be able to see, I am sitting in the shadow of Trinity Wall Street. We have, as you mentioned earlier, the Jewish Christian Dialogue has been meeting in New York City. And this morning we spent time over at the September 11th Memorial and the Greek Orthodox Shrine, and had some really meaningful experiences, which combined with our program yesterday were a reminder of the responsibility we have as people of faith to remember, to tell our stories, and to ensure that our histories, and I'm being intentional about the plurality there, are part of our legacy that we actively pass down to the next generations. So sitting here so close to the memorial, I'm reminded that part of what our children need to understand is that alongside the tragedy that occurred on that day, grew an enormous movement of interreligious solidarity, seeking understanding that we through Shoulder to Shoulder are a part of. The history of the Shoulder to Shoulder campaign is directly tied to being a counter narrative, a counter action to the hatred, the fear, the religious bigotry that rose out of the ashes of that day, and that is actually coherent and consistent with the kinds of national histories that are actual, that are the reality, as opposed to the Christian nationalist histories, that we together as people of faith can educate our children at the interfaith iftar at the Interfaith Passover Seder. And of course, with our recent confluence of High Holy Days, we can take those specific opportunities, but really it is an ongoing responsibility that we have. The last thing I'll say is I am very clear that my children's Christian formation is incomplete if they know nothing of the neighbors that they are called to love. If they don't understand not just the basics of other religious traditions, but why that's important to our neighbors, then we fail to fully love them as who they are and who God has called them to be. And so I think that in the home responsibility, our collective responsibility, and our interfaith responsibility all dovetail together.
And
Thank
Catherine,
you.
let me just say that it's a part of our belief to teach the children that they should really believe in other revelations that came before the final message or the message of Islam. So, and we have that in the scripture. So children need to know that, you know, they were angels, they were books, they were messengers, were sent by God to different communities that came before Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So it really is a part of that education. I just want to, Bert, if you just allow me, there is something that's really said by the fourth caliph, Khalifa Ali ibn Abi Talib, who was the Khalifa Ali. He was the fourth one, and he was the cousin of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And he said, a person is either your brother in faith or your equal in humanity. You know, that's really clearly shows, you know, the kindness and love and solidarity and relationship we really need to extend to those who are not necessarily in our in our own tribes, if you will. But shoulder to shoulder, you mentioned shoulder to shoulder, Catherine, and how shoulder to shoulder actually was founded and created. Actually, people of faith came to say that we will stand shoulder to shoulder with the American Muslim communities because of the rising Islamophobia in the country. We come to frame the conversation. It's not only the Muslim community should actually address this issue, but it is an issue for us as a Christian, as an evangelical, as the Jews, as the people of other faith as well, to say to those who are burning the Quran, for instance, this is not the message of Jesus Christ, because the message is of love, not the message of hate, right? And to those who are committing an act of vandalism in Islamic centers, or against building a house of worship or Islamic center or a mosque, to say that, well, this is not America. So we have to come together as a solidarity as we continue to address all forms of bigotry.
I want to say that was part of the genius that you and Rich Kilmer did in establishing Shoulder to Shoulder now more than 10 years ago, that you determined that it should not be a Muslim organization at all, that it should be an organization of Jewish and Christian and other faiths, because to stand up for Muslims is to stand up for American values, and that means to stand up for ourselves as well. When we were preparing for this conversation, Catherine, I think, articulated it, that each religion needs to be self-critical, and that's part of it. It's also recognizing, what is it, the mote in my eye, is the phrase. I think there was a great first century rabbi who said that. He was Jesus of Nazareth. If I can quote the Hebrew Bible, we have two precepts that I think really power this conversation. One is in Leviticus 19, love your neighbor as yourself. And it's quite clear from the Torah that your neighbor means the stranger, because we're told, love your neighbor as yourself, know the stranger. You were strangers in the land of Egypt. So if there's one message we should get from Passover, it's love your neighbor as yourself. The corollary to that, which is in, I think, Deuteronomy, which we recite daily in the Shema, is teach your children. So those two commandments are really, really essential commandments in how we behave and what we do. Mohammed and I were part of a seminar that we did with the Islamic Society of North America some years ago, and Hartford Seminary, a Christian seminary, and the Jewish Theological Seminary. And we met in New York and we met in DC, and we encouraged synagogues and mosques and churches up and down the primarily Eastern Seaboard to participate. One of the results was a book called Sharing the Well, a resource guide for Jewish Muslim engagement. If you can read the small print, Mohammed was one of the co-editors. I'm the publisher. And I want to say that it is available for free online. The material on Judaism was written all by Jewish scholars. The material on Islam was written by Muslim scholars. And what's true here is also true, I'm sure, for Christianity as well. So I'm encouraging people, and again, now I think it's 14 years, 2014 maybe it came out, that we have this guide. It's still available, and it's available for free online. I want to turn now to some of the questions that have been coming in from listeners in the chat, all of which I think are very much on point. How we do dialogue. And I want to characterize it. I'm going to reframe the question that was asked to this. Often when people do dialogue, they do it somewhat competitively. And it's almost as though they're saying, my religion's actually better than yours. And the primary mode of doing it is pernicious. You compare your best to their worst. So somebody can read the Quran and take out the verses that are disturbing and say, see, look what you guys say. I know because I have done this myself as an exercise. I can open the Torah and take out verses that leave me mortified out if you take them out of context. And I know that's true of the New Testament as well. So I think one of the questions people are asking is, how do you ensure that dialogue is comparing our best to your best and hopefully teaching us to love one another? What are the guardrails? Catherine,
Well,
please.
I'd love to jump in here because the late Krister Stendhal, who of course is from the theological tradition that I'm part of, his 3 rules of interreligious understanding, I think, remain foundational for all of this. And a lot of folks don't know that when he coined the phrase holy envy and presented these 3 rules, it was really in the context of coming to the defense, and I mean that in a theological sense in terms of the 8th commandment, of the LDS neighbors in Sweden as they were forming their religious communities. And so these 3 rules are include don't compare your best to your co-religionist's worst, but another key piece is to ask the adherents of the religious tradition and not its enemies. And it's such a basic precept.
Can you unpack that a little? I'm not sure I understand.
Yeah, so if I want to learn more about Islam, I would ask Dr. El Sanusi and not a Christian nationalist, to be very clear about it.
Okay.
And then the third piece is about leaving room for holy envy. And what I love about holy envy is that it is not just an admiration of someone else's religion in this case, or spiritual tradition. But really, when you think about what envy does to you in the best possible sense, it invites you to your best possible self. Mm-hmm. So that when you are really envious of someone else, you would aspire to replicate something of what you see in them and their holy life and experience. So I would just add the wisdom of Krister Stendhal to our conversation.
He
So
was a great, great teacher. Esther, I'm sorry, I
I
interrupted.
want to
Go
add,
ahead.
I love that. That's, I want to add one other principle that I've been taught, not from a theologian actually, but from Liz Lerman, who is a beloved member of Temple Micah, where I'm a member, who's a dance genius, and who uses dance in sort of to heal and build bridges and community. And so she always taught us, when she does activity with us, turn your discomfort into inquiry.
Mm,
And
mm.
I use that a lot in my day-to-day work about just how to teach curiosity within congregational change. But in this context, it made me, as it was coming to me as you were speaking, Catherine, because I also think one of the things why interfaith dialogue, and that you brought up, Bert, is that we are uncomfortable. There is that fear of, are we making something kosher, to use a Jewish term, that doesn't feel quite kosher yet? So we come on with our backs up, as opposed to, so this idea of just, can we name, is there just some discomfort here? So name it, but then turn it into inquiry, right? Turn it into curiosity, of the people, to go to the point that you raised about adherence. So turn your discomfort into inquiry and try and be as curious as possible. I mean, the flip side, the sort of the same coin that I say also is, at least this, I say this in a different context of older people judging the millennials I work with. Less judgment, more empathy, right?
So, Esther, you said repeatedly, and I think you're right, discomfort. And
Yeah.
one of the questioners in the chat, I think, articulated an aspect of the discomfort that may be true for all three of you on the screen, maybe not so much for me, since both of my children are married, but you all have kids who are still single. And the question they asked is there a danger in interfaith contexts that it can lead then to intermarriage?
Well, this is, depends who you talk to. I don't find intermarriage uncomfortable.
Okay, that's a good start right there.
So, and that, you asked a different rabbi, you'd get a different answer. So I am not worried about that. I'm not worried about that. But just to comment.
And now I just want to turn to Mohammed, because
go ahead.
He has a beautiful
Please.
young daughter, Jude, who's just coming into her own. Do you worry?
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, so Bert, I think just to go back to the first the questions about how comfortable we are on all of that, and how we come up with on this dialogue. I always say that in the interfaith dialogue, we want to make sure, be proud of your religion and bring your religion with you to the table of the dialogue. Do not leave your religion outside the room of the dialogue.
Yes.
Bring your religion with you, Bert, when we're dialoguing, because we come to the table, different faith, different traditions, but we face a problem that not necessarily differentiating between who is Jew, who is Christian, or who is Muslim, or who is Hindu, or who is Sikh. When problem comes, they attack everyone. That's why we want to bring the beauty of our different religions to resolve the problem that impacting the humanity as a whole, regardless of any religious affiliation or background. I think that's, for me, is really the bottom line. Use the religion, bring it in. Then the second thing I would say is that it's important to come to the table with that understanding of mutual respect. To respect the others is respect their tradition, their religion, their practice. That's also important, with the pure heart and pure intention that you really want to accomplish something. That's really critical. But coming back to the interfaith marriage, I would say, in Islam, Bert, is that it is allowed for interreligious marriages. Of course, there are some conditions on all of that, but this is definitely allowed from the Islamic perspective. But again, we're living in this pluralistic society. We see that the interreligious marriages around us, and the children also see that. because right now, this is an open society. It's no longer you are just in your own family or your own community. Everything is open. So we attend so many events and social gathering, Bert. So my little Jude, she see that, a Christian and a Muslim, are married. She see that, I was in this, iftar just last week, and our guest and this of honor was the second gentleman.
Yes.
Second gentleman, Imhoff. And he was talking about the interfaith, and then he mentioned that his own interfaith married.
Right.
Our Vice President Kamala Harris.
Right.
So these are now realities that we have to just, live with them, and understanding that is the way to go.
Great. And Catherine, you want to have maybe a last word here?
Well, I resist thinking about my kids getting married just because it's slipping away too quickly. But I will add simply that this is a significant pastoral issue that our church has been working to address through pastoral guidelines. But at the end of the day, as I said earlier, my sense is that my children's Christian formation demands interfaith sensitivities and capabilities that ultimately, in my experience, but I think this is an adage of interfaith work in general, have served in my own experience to strengthen my Christian identity, my Christian faith, and my capacity to, as Muhammad reminded us, to show up at the table as who I am and who I'm called to be.
I'll say it in Hebrew. Baruch Hashem Yom Yom. Praise be God by day. Alhamdulillah. This has really been a remarkably fruitful conversation. I want to close almost with one last question that just came in, which is really, to me, on point, and yet maybe not on point. The question was, how about in dialogue when people insist my God is a greater God than your God? And my answer looking at the screen is, we're all here of the Abrahamic religions, and we are all monotheists, which means my God is your God and your God is my God.
Amen.
And I think it's terribly important to recognize that we all share God, and we're all created in God's image, which insists, therefore, that we respect one another. Some of the questions have been asking, this will be posted on YouTube on the JTS channel. So probably not today, maybe by Monday, it'll be up on YouTube. So you will be able to review this fruitful and rich conversation. And to close, I want to call on my colleague in Israel. He's been listening from Jerusalem, Dr. Adam Ofterman. He is the professor at the Department of Jewish Philosophy and Talmud at Tel Aviv University and a senior fellow in the Center for Religious and Interreligious Studies. He is the leader of the John Paul II Center and serves as senior fellow of the Kogut Center for Renewal of Jewish Thought at the Shalom Hartman Institute. Adam, I have a suspicion that you get paid with titles in lieu of salary. But
thank you.
Please,
thank you, Rabbi
you
Bert.
get the last word.
Thank you so much, really, for Rabbi Bert, for your ongoing partnership and for facilitating this really fascinating dialogue. And thank you, really, the speakers, for really inspiring and a beautiful talk. Although focusing on the American reality, so much of what you discussed here today is relevant to many places worldwide, including here in, obviously, in Jerusalem. I just want to say a few words about our center, where we train leaders from all around the globe in interreligious dialogue. Such training is based upon a solid theological education and the study of the history and meaning of dialogue in each of our traditions. In addition, we specialize in developing the practical skills that are crucial to impact effectively the many different communities we work in worldwide. And I think tonight we saw very impressive speakers that have those skills. Connecting theology to action is at the core of our mission, and educating our leaders on how to identify and address anti-Semitism and other forms of hatred is unfortunately a critical part of our formation. We currently have more than 140 leaders worldwide. We continue to support and mentor. Some of them are with us tonight by Zoom from all around the world. All of this, including today's event, is sponsored, like we mentioned before, by the Russell Berry Foundation. I want to thank Angelica Berry, Dr. Idana Goldberg, and Naomi Shank from the Berry Foundation for sponsoring this event and for their ongoing support of our work. I'm pleased also to thank your team at JTS, Rabbi Bert, and Elena Dini at the JP2 Center. Thank you all for joining us tonight, and good night and shalom from Jerusalem.
And I'm going to add a last word, if I can, thanking Adam, thanking the John Paul II Center. Indeed, we have been listening to, people have been listening from all over the world, but especially there's a cadre in Rome, there's a cadre in Jerusalem. We're very grateful for that. The Berry Foundation has just been magnificent in their support of this. And I'm gratefully thank Chris Hickey for making the Zoom work so well. And I just want to end with wishes for an Eid Mubarak to my Muslim brothers and sisters who are on the call. The Eid will start this weekend, it's tomorrow or Saturday. And I know when Shabbat starts, that's tomorrow night. So I wish you all as well a Shabbat Shalom, blessings of peace to all of you. Thank you.